My name is Eleanor, 34, and I never thought I'd see triumph flash across my husband Richard's face as he signed our divorce papers. 10 years together, and he couldn't hide his smirk, thinking he'd finally won. His attorney whispered something, making him laugh out loud. The judge raised an eyebrow when she read my financial disclosure. Richard's laughter died instantly. "Mrs. Campbell, this net worth statement, is this accurate?" I nodded calmly. Richard's face drained of color as he realized the devastating mistake he'd just made. I still remember the absolute silence that fell over that courtroom. If you've ever experienced that moment when someone who betrayed you realizes they've made a terrible miscalculation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Before I continue with my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy real stories about family betrayal and sweet, sweet karma. Trust me, what happened next in that courtroom changed everything. Richard and I met at a charity gala in Boston 12 years ago. I was there representing my software company, and he was the charming entrepreneur everyone wanted to talk to. When our eyes met across the room, it felt like one of those movie moments you never believe actually happen in real life. He approached me with confidence, but it was his genuine interest in my work that captured my attention. Most men I dated were intimidated by my career in tech, but Richard seemed fascinated. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Weekend trips to Vermont, surprise picnics in the park, and long conversations about our dreams for the future. 6 months after we met, he proposed during a sunset sail on the Charles River. I said yes, without hesitation. I truly believed I'd found my partner, my equal, someone who valued my ambition as much as I valued his. Our wedding was everything I dreamed of as a little girl. We married in June at my grandmother Rose's estate in the Berkshires. 200 guests, a string quartet, and my handmade lace gown that took 6 months to complete. Richard looked at me with such adoration as I walked down the aisle. My best friend Samantha was my maid of honor, and she whispered, "He looks at you like you hung the moon, Ellie." I believed her. For our honeymoon, we spent 3 weeks in Santorini. We stayed in a private villa overlooking the caldera, drinking wine on our terrace as the sun set over the Aegean Sea. Richard surprised me with cooking classes, a private boat tour, and a sunset horseback ride along the beach. Every night, we fell asleep tangled in each other's arms, whispering about the life we would build together. When we returned, we bought our dream home in Beacon Hill. A beautiful brownstone with high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and a garden that bloomed spectacularly every spring. We spent weekends renovating, painting walls together, arguing playfully about furniture, and hosting dinner parties for our expanding social circle. Our home became the gathering place for holidays, birthdays, and impromptu Friday night cocktails. I continued advancing in my career as a software developer, eventually becoming CTO of a promising startup. The hours were long, but Richard seemed supportive. "You're brilliant, Eleanor. They're lucky to have you," he would say. I used my salary to support us while Richard worked to get his marketing consultancy off the ground. I never minded. We were a team, building our future together brick by brick. In those early years, Richard's family welcomed me warmly, at least on the surface. His mother Margaret hosted elaborate Sunday dinners, always making my favorite dessert. His sister Diana invited me for shopping trips and spa days. But there were subtle undercurrents I chose to ignore. Comments about my little computer job from Margaret. Diana surprised that Richard would marry someone so career-focused. Small jabs wrapped in smiles and hugs. "Family is everything to Richard," Margaret told me once while we prepared Thanksgiving dinner. "The Campbell men need wives who understand that family comes first." I smiled and nodded, not realizing she was giving me a warning I should have heeded. By our 5th anniversary, things had shifted. Richard's business was taking off, and suddenly our schedules rarely aligned. When my startup was acquired, making me financially comfortable for the first time in my life, Richard organized a lovely celebration dinner but seemed distracted throughout. When I mentioned investing my newfound wealth, he patted my hand and said, "Let me handle the financial decisions, sweetheart. That's always been my strength." I didn't argue. Instead, I quietly met with my financial advisor Marcus the following week and began making my own investment decisions. A portion went into a joint account with Richard, but the bulk I managed independently. It was the best decision I ever made. By year 7, the cracks in our marriage were becoming impossible to ignore. Richard worked later and later. Business trips multiplied. When he was home, he was glued to his phone. Samantha noticed before I allowed myself to. "Ellie, when was the last time Richard attended anything important to you?" she asked after he missed my company's major product launch. I had no answer. Our 8th anniversary came and went without acknowledgement from Richard. When I mentioned it the next day, he seemed genuinely surprised, then defensive. "I've been working non-stop to build something for us, Eleanor. I can't believe you're counting missed anniversaries when I'm out there securing our future." The irony was that my own career and investments were flourishing while I supported his dreams. I had discovered an investment opportunity in an AI startup that would later become the cornerstone of my wealth. When I mentioned it to Richard, he dismissed it as too risky and suggested I stick to safer investments. I invested anyway, telling myself that when it paid off, he would see my financial instincts were sound. By our 9th anniversary, Richard didn't even pretend to remember. I spent the evening alone in our beautiful home, scrolling through photos of happier times, wondering when my husband had become a stranger. That night, I heard him on the phone in his office, laughing in a way he hadn't laughed with me in years. I told myself it was a business call, but deep down I knew better. Samantha had been trying to warn me for months. "There's something off about his excuses, Ellie. The constant work emergencies, the weekend conferences, the late-night phone calls." I dismissed her concerns as overprotectiveness. Samantha had been through a painful divorce herself, and I thought she was projecting her experiences onto my marriage. "Richard wouldn't cheat," I told her confidently. "We built this life together. He wouldn't throw that away." But as our 10th anniversary approached, even I couldn't deny the signs. The password on his phone changed. The mysterious credit card charges. The new cologne. The sudden interest in his appearance. The classic signs were all there, but I kept making excuses, clinging to memories of the man who had once looked at me like I was his entire world. I tried everything to reconnect. Weekend getaways that he canceled last minute. Surprise dinners he came home too late to eat. Lingerie that stayed unworn in my drawer. Couples therapy he attended twice before declaring it a waste of time. All while this was happening, I continued building my secret fortune. Not out of malice, but out of the financial independence my grandmother had instilled in me. "Never put all your eggs in a man's basket," Rose would say. "No matter how much you love him." If only I had listened to her about other aspects of my marriage as well. The day I discovered Richard's betrayal remains seared in my memory. It was an ordinary Tuesday in October. Richard had left for work early, forgetting his presentation tablet. He had an important client meeting, so I decided to drop it off at his office on my way to work. His executive assistant Jenna greeted me with visible surprise when I arrived. "Oh, Eleanor, Richard isn't expecting you, is he?" "Just dropping off his tablet," I explained, noting her nervous energy. "Is he in a meeting?" "He actually stepped out for coffee," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I can give it to him when he returns." Something about her discomfort made me hesitate. "That's okay. I'll just leave it on his desk." As I placed the tablet down, Richard's phone lit up with a text message. I wouldn't normally look, but the preview caught my eye. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again tonight. Miss you already." The sender's name was J Business. My hands shook as I picked up his phone. I knew his password had changed, but in a moment of clarity, I tried Jenna's birth date. I'd seen it on the office birthday calendar just weeks before. The phone unlocked. Hundreds of messages confirmed what I already knew in my heart. Richard and Jenna had been having an affair for over 8 months. Photos. Hotel receipts. Plans for a weekend getaway to the Hamptons during a business trip Richard had told me about. I scrolled through their conversations, each message like a knife. They laughed about deceiving me. Richard complained about our marriage, painting me as cold and career-obsessed. Eleanor only cares about her work, he wrote. You understand me in ways she never has. I took screenshots of everything, sending them to my own phone before carefully replacing his exactly as I'd found it. Then I walked out past Jenna, with a smile that must have looked as hollow as I felt. Please tell Richard the first stopped by, I said calmly. Her face paled. She knew that I knew. That evening, when Richard came home, I was waiting. He walked in, preoccupied with his phone as usual. How was your day? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Fine, he mumbled, barely looking up. Busy. I bet it was, I said. Jenna keeping you on your toes? His head snapped up, eyes narrowing slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I dropped your tablet off at the office today. A flash of panic crossed his face before he controlled it. Oh. You should have texted me. I would have picked it up. I saw your text, Richard. He attempted indignation first. You went through my phone? That's a violation of my privacy. Don't, I said quietly. I know about you and Jenna. I've seen everything. His strategy shifted instantly to minimization. It's not what you think, Eleanor. It was just a few times. A mistake. It didn't mean anything. 8 months of mistakes. I asked, my voice breaking for the first time. Planning weekend getaways together? Telling her I don't understand you? That sounds like more than nothing. He paced the room, running hands through his hair. You're never here, Eleanor. You're always working, always focused on your career. Do you know how lonely that's been for me? The audacity of his blame-shifting stunned me. I supported you for years while you built your business. I've been right here, Richard. You're the one who pulled away. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he exploded. You're keeping score. Relationships aren't business transactions, Eleanor. The argument continued for hours, with Richard alternating between blame, minimization, and occasional moments of seeming remorse. By morning, he had rewritten our entire marital history to justify his betrayal. According to him, I had been emotionally unavailable, prioritized work over him, and failed to appreciate his needs. I almost believed him. That's how effective his gaslighting was. For a moment, I found myself apologizing for my role in driving him to infidelity. But something inside me, the part that my grandmother had nurtured, refused to accept full responsibility for his choices. The next day, while Richard was at work, I called Bailey Thomas, a private investigator recommended by a colleague who had gone through a similar situation. I need to know the full extent of my husband's affair, I told her. And I need to know if there's anything else I should be aware of. Bailey's investigation revealed far more than I had imagined. The affair with Jenna had indeed been going on for 8 months, but there had been others before her. Brief entanglements with a client, a fitness instructor, even a waitress from our favorite restaurant. Richard had been unfaithful for most of our marriage. More disturbingly, Bailey discovered financial improprieties. Richard had been diverting company funds to impress Jenna. Weekend trips booked as business expenses. A diamond bracelet classified as client gifts. A down payment on a luxury car categorized as transportation costs. He's committing fraud, Bailey explained gently. And based on these patterns, he's been planning an exit strategy from your marriage for at least a year. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos of Richard and Jenna entering hotels. Credit card statements showing purchases I'd never seen. Emails discussing their future together once he was free of his marriage. While I was processing this information, Richard's mother Margaret called. Her voice dripped with practiced concern. Eleanor, darling. Richard told us you're having some difficulties. I think we should talk about what's best for the family. What did he tell you exactly? I asked. That you've been struggling, dear. That your work has taken priority over your marriage, and now you're making wild accusations because you feel guilty. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Did he mention his affair with his assistant? Or the company money he's spent on her? Margaret's tone chilled instantly. Every marriage has challenges, Eleanor. Campbell men work hard, and sometimes they need understanding. Richard's father had his indiscretions too, but we worked through them for the sake of the family. I'm sure if you focus on being more available to Richard's needs. I hung up before she could finish. The Campbell family was closing ranks around Richard, just as they always had when he made mistakes. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I was organizing our home office and found papers hidden in Richard's desk. Modified prenuptial agreement drafts, dated 6 months earlier, designed to limit my financial claims in case of divorce. He hadn't just been planning to leave, he'd been strategizing to leave me with as little as possible. When Richard finally asked for a divorce, he expected tears, pleading, perhaps even my offer to work things out. Instead, he found me eerily composed. "I think that's for the best," I said calmly. His confidence faltered momentarily. You do?" "Yes, Richard. I agree completely." His confusion was visible. This wasn't the script he had prepared for. The woman who had supported him for a decade, who had believed in his dreams and tolerated his absences, was accepting the end of their marriage without a fight. What Richard didn't know, what he had never bothered to discover, was that I had been preparing too. Not for divorce, but for a life where my value wasn't determined by his validation. While he had been building a house of lies, I had been quietly constructing a fortress. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours," I said, standing to leave the room. "I'm sure we can handle this amicably." His stunned expression was the first genuine reaction I'd seen from him in years. My grandmother Rose raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She was a remarkable woman who had built her own wealth after my grandfather's early death left her a widow at 35 with 2 young children. "A woman without her own money is a woman without choices," Rose told me repeatedly throughout my childhood. She had grown up during the Depression, watching her own mother trapped in an unhappy marriage because she couldn't afford to leave. Rose was determined that no woman in our family would ever be financially dependent on a man again. From my first babysitting job at 12, Rose insisted I save half of everything I earned. When I got my first real job at 16, waiting tables at the local diner, she took me to open my first investment account. "Compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world," she said, quoting Einstein. "Those who understand it earn it. Those who don't pay it." By the time I graduated college with my computer science degree, I had already developed the habit of living below my means and investing the difference. While my classmates splurged on new cars and apartments, I drove my grandmother's old Honda and shared a modest apartment with Samantha. 40% of every paycheck went straight into my investment accounts, divided between index funds, individual stocks and companies whose products I used and believed in, and later, real estate. When I landed my first job at a promising tech startup, the salary was modest, but the equity compensation was generous. My colleagues often sold their vested shares immediately, eager for cash to fund their lifestyles. I held mine, believing in the company's potential. When the company was acquired 3 years later, those shares became the foundation of my growing wealth. By the time I met Richard, I had a 6-figure investment portfolio that was growing steadily. I had also purchased my first rental property, a small duplex that generated positive cash flow each month. Richard knew I was good with money, but he never asked for details. He assumed my career simply provided a nice lifestyle supplement to his entrepreneurial ambitions. After we married, I continued my financial discipline even as our joint lifestyle expanded with Richard's tastes. I supported us completely during the first 3 years of our marriage while he established his marketing consultancy. Even after his business became profitable, I maintained my separate accounts and continued investing 40% of my income. Marcus Chen had been my financial advisor since my first windfall. He was a quiet, thoughtful man who respected my grandmother's influence on my financial philosophy. "Rose taught you well," he would say during our quarterly meetings. "Most people your age are focused on showing wealth, not building it." Under Marcus's guidance, my portfolio diversified further. We added commercial real estate, international stocks, and carefully selected alternative investments. When cryptocurrency emerged, I allocated a small percentage of my portfolio to Bitcoin and Ethereum, early enough that those small allocations grew exponentially. The true game changer came 5 years into my marriage. A former colleague approached me about investing in his artificial intelligence startup. The technology was revolutionary, a natural language processing system that could analyze emotional context in written communication. I immediately recognized its potential for customer service applications, healthcare, and education. It's high risk, Marcus cautioned when I brought him the prospectus. But the potential return is significant if they execute well. How much are you thinking of investing? I decided to invest $50,000, a substantial sum, but one I could afford to lose if the venture failed. When I mentioned it to Richard, he dismissed the opportunity immediately. Tech startups are a dime a dozen, Eleanor. Most fail within the first year. We should put that money into something sensible, like expanding my client entertainment budget. I nodded and changed the subject. The next day, I transferred the funds to the startup without mentioning it again. It was my money, earned before our marriage and kept separate throughout. Richard never asked about it again. 3 years later, that startup was acquired by one of the tech giants for a staggering sum. My $50,000 investment returned nearly $4 million. When the wire hit my account, I stared at the balance in disbelief before calling Marcus. "Congratulations," he said warmly. "Your instincts were spot on. What should I do with it?" I asked, still processing the reality of the numbers on my screen. "Let's diversify immediately," he advised. "This is life-changing money if managed correctly." We deployed the capital strategically: blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds for tax advantages, commercial real estate partnerships, and another tranche of promising tech investments. We also established a trust in my name, separate from any marital assets. By the time Richard's infidelities came to light, my personal net worth had grown to just over $15 million. Richard had no idea. In his mind, I was still the supportive wife with the good job who had helped him build his business. He had never bothered to look closely at my financial contributions, assuming his business success dwarfed my earnings. When I realized our marriage was ending, I contacted Victoria James, one of the top divorce attorneys in Massachusetts. Her reputation for handling high-net-worth cases with discretion made her perfect for my situation. "Tell me everything," she said during our first meeting. I laid out the history of our marriage, Richard's infidelities, and most importantly, the careful separation I had maintained between my assets and our marital property. "You've done something most clients haven't," Victoria said, reviewing my financial documentation with raised eyebrows. "You've kept meticulous records and maintained separation of premarital assets. That's going to be tremendously helpful." "My grandmother taught me well," I replied. "What does your husband know about your financial situation?" she asked. "Almost nothing. He's assumed I've contributed my salary to our household and joint investments, which I have. But he has no idea about my personal portfolio or the startup windfall." Victoria smiled slightly. "And your husband's financial situation?" "His business appears successful, but according to my investigator, he's been misappropriating funds and his actual position may be shakier than it seems." "Let him believe he has the upper hand financially," Victoria advised. "Based on what you've told me, he's likely to overplay his position if he thinks you're financially dependent on him. We'll use that." Over the next few weeks, I gathered every financial document Victoria requested. Bank statements, investment account records, property deeds, tax returns, proof of the origins of my investment capital, and documentation showing the separation of assets throughout our marriage. "Your case is unusually clean," Victoria commented during our final prep meeting. "Most couples commingle everything, which makes division much more contentious." "Richard never took much interest in my finances," I explained. "He was always more concerned with appearances than substance." "That's about to work significantly in your favor," Victoria said with a satisfied nod. As we prepared for preliminary divorce proceedings, I maintained my composure through the most difficult emotional period of my life. I had loved Richard deeply. I had believed in our partnership. Discovering that the man I married existed only in my imagination was devastating. But each night, as I reviewed my financial statements and saw the evidence of my own capabilities staring back at me in black and white, I found strength. While Richard had been building his house of cards, I had been quietly constructing something far more durable: financial independence. "You're handling this remarkably well," Samantha observed over wine one evening. "I'm heartbroken," I admitted. "But not broken." "What are you going to do when he finds out?" she asked. "About the money?" I considered this question carefully before answering. "Watch his face," I said finally. "And remember every moment." Our first mediation session set the tone for what would follow. Richard arrived with Bradford Wells, an attorney known for his aggressive tactics in high-profile divorce cases. I recognized him from news coverage of celebrity divorces. He was expensive, ruthless, and had a reputation for devastating the financially weaker spouse. "Mrs. Campbell," Bradford greeted me with a thin smile. "I hope we can make this process as painless as possible." Richard didn't meet my eyes. He sat across the table, looking confident, almost smug. Victoria placed a hand briefly on my arm. "Let them show their cards first," she whispered. Bradford wasted no time outlining Richard's terms. "My client is prepared to be generous despite the circumstances," he began, sliding a document across the table. "He's offering Mrs. Campbell the following: a one-time payment of $200,000, her personal effects, and her vehicle. Mr. Campbell will retain the primary residence, all investment accounts established during the marriage, his business interests, and all associated assets." Victoria reviewed the document without expression while I maintained what I hoped was a neutral face. Inside, I was reeling at the audacity. Richard was essentially offering me nothing. The generous cash payment wouldn't even cover a year's living expenses in Boston. "I see," Victoria said calmly. "And the prenuptial agreement is quite clear about asset division," Bradford replied confidently. "The prenuptial agreement that was signed 10 years ago but never modified?" Victoria clarified, her tone innocent. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Bradford's face. "There have been discussions about modifications." "Discussions don't constitute legal amendments," Victoria pointed out. "The original agreement states that assets acquired by either party through their separate business activities remain separate property, while jointly acquired assets are subject to equitable division." "That's correct," Bradford agreed cautiously. "Then we'll need full financial disclosure from both parties before proceeding further," Victoria stated. "My client will be asserting her rights to her separate property as outlined in the original agreement." Richard leaned forward. "Eleanor, don't make this difficult. You know most of what we have came from my business success." I met his eyes for the first time.
Doi.
The mediation ended without resolution, with both sides agreeing to prepare complete financial disclosures for the next meeting. As we left, Richard caught my arm. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "Bradford will tear apart whatever case you think you have." "We'll see," I replied, gently removing his hand. The following week, Richard escalated his demands. Now he wanted my grandmother's antique jewelry collection, claiming it had been gifted to the marriage. He also insisted on keeping the vacation property in Vermont that we had purchased together, despite the fact that I had contributed 70% of the down payment. "He's testing your resolve," Victoria explained. "He expects you to break down and accept less to avoid conflict." But I had discovered a well of strength within myself. Each unreasonable demand only strengthened my determination to see this through. I remained silent in meetings, letting Victoria handle the legal parrying while I observed Richard's growing frustration with my lack of emotional response. Margaret and Diana launched their own campaign of pressure. They called daily with appeals to family loyalty and thinly veiled threats about social standing. "You'll be alone, Eleanor," Margaret warned during one call. "The divorce will never go in your favor. Richard has connections throughout the city. No one leaves a Campbell and comes out ahead," Diana added during a chance encounter at our country club. "You should take what Richard is offering while he's still being generous." I found support in unexpected places. My sister Grace flew in from Seattle, taking leave from her medical practice to stay with me for 2 crucial weeks. Samantha came by almost daily with food, wine, and unwavering loyalty. My colleagues closed ranks around me, offering everything from legal contacts to temporary housing. Most surprisingly, several of Richard's former girlfriends reached out after news of our separation spread. They shared stories of his manipulations, his grandiose promises, his subtle cruelties. Each conversation confirmed what I was slowly accepting. Richard had never been the man I thought I married. As the proceedings continued, Richard's true nature emerged more clearly. In court, he claimed I couldn't possibly maintain my lifestyle without his support. "My wife has never had to worry about money," he testified smugly. "I've provided everything." His attorney submitted affidavits from Richard's business associates attesting to his financial genius and my supposed dependence. They painted me as a hobbyist who played at having a career while Richard built an empire. Throughout it all, I maintained my composure, watching as Richard dug himself deeper into a narrative that was about to collapse spectacularly. He began appearing publicly with Jenna, barely attempting to hide their relationship despite the ongoing divorce. Photos of them at restaurants and events circulated among our social circle, accompanied by Richard's version of events. That I had been cold, career-obsessed, unavailable. "He's trying to control the narrative," Grace observed as we scrolled through social media one evening. "Classic narcissist behavior." "Let him," I replied. "The truth will come out soon enough." Victoria advised patience as we approached the final hearing where all financial disclosures would be reviewed. "The judge assigned to your case is thorough and fair," she assured me. "She doesn't tolerate games or hidden assets." The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stood at the window of the luxury apartment I'd rented after moving out of our home, looking out at the Boston skyline glittering against the night sky. For 10 years, I had poured my heart, soul, and resources into a marriage that had been a mirage. Tomorrow, the illusion would finally dissolve completely. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember who you are. Not who he tried to make you believe you were." I took a deep breath and replied, "I know exactly who I am. Tomorrow, so will he." As I finally drifted off to sleep, I felt something I hadn't expected, not anger or vengeance, but a profound sense of liberation. Whatever happened in that courtroom, I had already reclaimed the most important thing: myself. I suppose this is the part where I should ask you to like this video if you're enjoying my story so far. The truth is, sharing this has been unexpectedly therapeutic for me. If you've ever had that moment where you realized your own worth after someone tried to diminish it, you understand exactly what I was feeling that night. Hit subscribe if you want to see more stories like mine, and let's continue with what happened next in that courtroom. The Suffolk County Courthouse was imposing with its granite facade and marble interiors. Our final hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. in courtroom 306. I arrived early with Victoria, dressed in a conservative navy suit that conveyed exactly the image we wanted: professional, composed, and utterly reasonable. "Remember," Victoria murmured as we waited on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, "let them present first. Don't react to anything they say, no matter how provocative." I nodded, watching as Richard arrived with Bradford, both in expensive tailored suits projecting confidence and authority. Jenna slipped in behind them, taking a seat in the gallery. She wore a dress I recognized, one I had admired in a boutique window last year, which Richard had dismissed as overpriced. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard's family filed in next. Margaret, Diana, and Richard's brother-in-law Clark positioned themselves directly behind where Richard would sit, a unified front of Campbell solidarity. Margaret caught my eye and gave me a look of such pity it might have wounded me weeks ago. Today, I simply nodded politely in acknowledgement. Judge Patricia Hathaway entered precisely at 9 a.m., a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Campbell divorce proceedings," she announced, reviewing the file before her. "I understand we're here for final financial disclosure and settlement determination." "Yes, Your Honor." Bradford rose smoothly. "If it pleases the court, we'd like to present Mr. Campbell's position first." "Proceed," Judge Hathaway directed. Bradford launched into a carefully crafted narrative. Richard Campbell, brilliant entrepreneur and devoted husband, had built a marketing empire from nothing while supporting his wife's modest career aspirations. He had provided an enviable lifestyle, a beautiful home, and financial security. Now, facing the unfortunate dissolution of his marriage, he was prepared to be more than fair in the settlement. As Bradford spoke, Richard occasionally turned to exchange glances with Jenna or whisper something that made her smile. His display of disrespect was deliberate, I realized. He wanted me to see that he had moved on, that he had already replaced me. Mr. Campbell's net worth statement shows total assets of approximately $4 million, Bradford continued, distributing documents to the judge and Victoria. This includes the family residence valued at $1.8 million, his business interests valued at $1.5 million, investment accounts totaling approximately $500,000, and personal property valued at $200,000. Richard nodded along, looking pleased with himself. I noticed he was wearing his most expensive watch, the Patek Philippe I had given him for our 5th anniversary. Given Mrs. Campbell's limited financial contributions to the marriage and the prenuptial agreement stipulating separation of business assets, my client proposes the following settlement. Bradford continued, outlining essentially the same terms they had presented in mediation. Judge Hathaway reviewed the documents carefully, occasionally making notes. When Bradford finished, she looked up. Miss James, would you like to respond for your client? Victoria stood, the picture of calm confidence. Yes, Your Honor. While we appreciate the outline Mr. Wells has provided, there are several significant factual discrepancies that need to be addressed before discussing settlement terms. She methodically distributed our financial disclosure packets to the judge and opposing counsel. First, I'd like to correct the record regarding my client's contributions to the marriage. Far from being limited, Mrs. Campbell was the sole financial support for the first 3 years of the marriage, while Mr. Campbell established his business. She contributed equally to all household expenses thereafter and provided 70% of the down payment for their joint properties. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Victoria continued. Second, and most importantly, Mrs. Campbell's separate assets, which remain her separate property under the terms of the prenuptial agreement, are substantial. As you'll see in the financial disclosure, Mrs. Campbell's net worth is currently $15,423,000. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Richard's head snapped up, his face a mask of confusion. This includes, Victoria continued calmly, investment accounts totaling $12 million, real estate holdings valued at $3 million, and personal property valued at approximately $400,000. All of these assets were either owned prior to the marriage or acquired through Mrs. Campbell's separate business activities and kept meticulously separate from marital assets, as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement. Judge Hathaway examined the documents with new interest. These investment records show remarkable growth, she noted. Particularly this artificial intelligence company investment? Yes, Your Honor, Victoria confirmed. My client made a prescient early-stage investment that returned quite substantially when the company was acquired 3 years ago. I allowed myself to glance at Richard. His face had drained of color, his eyes fixed on the financial statements before him. Across the courtroom, I could see Jenna's expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she leaned forward, straining to see the numbers being discussed. Bradford was frantically flipping through the disclosure documents, clearly unprepared for this revelation. Your Honor, these statements require verification. We had no indication that Mrs. Campbell possessed assets of this magnitude. The documentation is quite thorough, Judge Hathaway remarked, reviewing the extensive records Victoria had prepared. Bank statements, investment records, property deeds, all with clear provenance. My client was never informed of these assets, Bradford protested. There was no legal obligation to disclose personal assets maintained separately under the terms of the prenuptial agreement, Victoria pointed out. Just as Mr. Campbell wasn't required to provide regular updates on his business holdings to Mrs. Campbell. Richard finally found his voice. This isn't possible, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Eleanor doesn't. She couldn't possibly have this kind of money without me knowing. Judge Hathaway fixed him with a stern look. Mr. Campbell, please address the court through your counsel. Bradford leaned in to whisper urgently to Richard, who shook his head vehemently in response. Your Honor, Bradford said, regaining his composure. Given this unexpected information, we would like to request a recess to consult with our client. Granted, Judge Hathaway replied. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As court adjourned temporarily, Richard immediately approached me, ignoring Victoria's presence. What is this? He demanded, his voice low and intense. Where did this money come from? From my work, Richard. I replied calmly. From investments I made with my own earnings. From the financial discipline my grandmother taught me. You've been hiding assets, he accused. Victoria stepped between us. Mr. Campbell, all communications should go through counsel. And I advise you to choose your words carefully. Accusations of hiding assets are serious and could be considered defamatory when evidence clearly shows these assets were properly maintained as separate property under your prenuptial agreement. Bradford pulled Richard away, but not before I saw the look in his eyes, a mixture of shock, anger, and something else that took me a moment to identify: fear. In the corridor outside, I watched as Richard huddled with Bradford, gesturing angrily. Jenna stood nearby, her expression growing increasingly troubled as the conversation continued. When Richard turned to speak to her, she took a step back, shaking her head. Samantha, who had arrived to support me, squeezed my hand. How are you feeling? She asked quietly. Surprisingly calm, I admitted. Like I'm watching a play I already know the ending to. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. Richard's previous confidence had evaporated. He sat rigidly, avoiding eye contact with everyone, including Jenna, who had moved to a seat farther back in the gallery. Bradford's approach had changed as well. Your Honor, in light of the new information, my client would like to propose an amended settlement based on equitable division of jointly acquired assets only, respecting the separate property provisions of the prenuptial agreement. The revised offer was considerably more reasonable, though still attempting to claim certain assets that were clearly mine. Victoria methodically addressed each point, providing documentation that established the origin and separate nature of disputed items. Furthermore, Victoria added, we have evidence that Mr. Campbell has been misappropriating company funds for personal expenses related to his extramarital affair. She submitted the documentation gathered by my private investigator. Judge Hathaway's expression darkened as she reviewed these materials. Mr. Wells, these allegations are concerning. Has your client disclosed these financial irregularities in his statements? Bradford looked distinctly uncomfortable. We believe these are legitimate business expenses, Your Honor. A diamond bracelet purchased from Tiffany and charged to the company as client gifts when Mr. Campbell's personal credit card statement shows it was delivered to Ms. Jenna Parker's home address? Judge Hathaway asked pointedly. Hotel suites booked under business accommodations when Mr. Campbell's wife was clearly not the occupant. Richard stared at the table, unable to meet the judge's gaze. Your Honor, Victoria continued, given these discrepancies, we request that Mr. Campbell's business valuations be independently verified before finalizing any settlement. So ordered. Judge Hathaway agreed. This court will appoint an independent forensic accountant to review Campbell Marketing Consultancy's finances. By the time the hearing concluded, the power dynamic had completely reversed. Richard, who had entered the courtroom expecting to dictate terms, left facing an investigation into his business practices and the realization that his soon-to-be ex-wife was substantially wealthier than him. As we prepared to leave, I noticed Jenna was already gone. Richard stood alone in the corridor, Bradford having departed to make arrangements for the financial review. For a moment, our eyes met. The man who had once looked at me with love, then with indifference, and finally with contempt, now looked at me with something new, respect tinged with regret. I nodded slightly in acknowledgement before turning away. That chapter of my life was closing, and I had no desire to linger on the final page. The courthouse steps were crowded with people coming and going, but Richard managed to catch up to me before I reached Victoria's car. Eleanor, wait, he called, slightly breathless. We need to talk. I turned slowly, Victoria at my side, ready to intervene. $15 million? His voice was a mixture of accusation and disbelief. All this time? How could you keep that from me? The irony of his indignation was almost laughable. You never asked, Richard. You were too busy assuming I needed you to survive. We were married, he insisted. Married people don't keep secrets like that. Like affairs with their assistants? I countered quietly. Like diverting company funds? Like preparing modified prenups behind your spouse's back? He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. That's different. This is about money that could have benefited both of us. The way your business benefited both of us? I asked. The business I supported you in building for years? I never hid my business from you, he protested. No, you just hid what you were doing with the money, I replied. The difference is, Richard, what I did was legal and ethical. I earned my money, invested it wisely, and kept it separate as our prenup allowed. What you did was fraud. Victoria touched my arm gently. Eleanor, we should go. Mr. Campbell, any further communications should go through counsel. As we walked away, Richard called after me. This isn't over, Eleanor. He was wrong. For me, it had been over the moment I discovered his betrayal. What followed was merely the settling of accounts. News travels quickly in close-knit social circles. By evening, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from mutual friends and acquaintances, most expressing surprise at the unexpected developments in my divorce. The narrative was shifting rapidly. Margaret called that night, her tone dramatically different from our previous conversations. Eleanor, dear, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. Richard didn't explain things clearly to us. What things would those be, Margaret? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Your financial situation. We had no idea you were so successful. She paused, clearly recalibrating her approach. Family is everything to the Campbells, you know. Despite these difficulties, you'll always be part of our family. That's very kind, I replied, not believing it for a second. But I think we both know that's not true. Perhaps we could meet for lunch, she suggested. There are some family matters Richard may not have handled appropriately. I think it's best if we communicate through our attorneys for now, I said firmly. Good night, Margaret. Diana tried next, her approach less subtle. Ellie, you know Richard has always loved you. Men make mistakes. The divorce doesn't have to happen. I declined her invitation to reconciliation as well. The independent forensic accountant's investigation into Campbell Marketing Consultancy revealed what I had begun to suspect. Beneath the veneer of success, Richard's business was struggling with significant debt. He had been maintaining appearances by misappropriating funds, cooking the books, and taking out high-interest loans to cover shortfalls. The real value of his business was less than half what he had claimed in his financial disclosures. Worse, several clients were considering legal action after discovering they had been overcharged or received services different from what they had contracted for. Jenna broke things off with Richard less than a week after the courtroom revelation. Samantha's friend who worked at Richard's company reported that Jenna had applied for a transfer to their New York office, citing a hostile work environment. Apparently, the fantasy of running off with a wealthy, successful entrepreneur had lost its appeal when that image crumbled. Richard's desperation became evident when he tried to withdraw his divorce petition. Bradford contacted Victoria with a proposal. Richard would agree to any reasonable settlement terms if I would consider reconciliation. He says he made a terrible mistake, Victoria reported during our meeting. He wants another chance. What he wants is access to my money to save his business, I replied. The answer is no. As the forensic accounting continued to uncover irregularities, Richard's professional reputation began to suffer. Clients withdrew, partners distanced themselves, and the business press that had once celebrated him as a marketing genius now questioned the substance behind the style. The final settlement was straightforward. We divided our joint assets equitably, each retained our separate property, and I received compensation for my documented contributions to Richard's business in its early years. The house was sold, with proceeds divided according to our respective contributions to its purchase and maintenance. The most satisfying moment came almost by accident. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, I received a call from Marcus about an investment opportunity. Campbell Marketing Consultancy's assets are being liquidated, he informed me. The intellectual property, client list, and methodology frameworks are available at a significant discount. Who's handling the liquidation? I asked. Bradford Wells, actually. Richard's former attorney. Apparently, he's representing the creditors now. The irony was too perfect to resist. I purchased the core assets of Richard's business at 20 cents on the dollar, then transferred them to a new marketing agency started by Richard's former creative director, Angela Reynolds. She had been marginalized at CMC despite her talent, and I had recognized her potential during our interactions at company events. I'm giving you a 5-year interest-free loan to purchase these assets, I told her when we met to discuss the arrangement. I'll be a silent partner with no involvement in day-to-day operations. Build something better than what Richard created. Angela has since transformed those assets into a thriving agency that emphasizes ethical business practices and employee development. She repaid the loan in 3 years instead of 5. Richard's family felt the impact of his downfall acutely. They had been financially dependent on him in ways I hadn't fully understood during our marriage. Margaret had to downsize from her Beacon Hill townhouse to a condominium in a less prestigious neighborhood. Diana's children were withdrawn from their private schools. I learned this not from any Campbell, but from mutual acquaintances who couldn't resist sharing the gossip. I took no pleasure in their difficulties, but I recognized the painful lesson they were learning, the danger of building your life on someone else's foundation. 6 months after our divorce, I ran into Richard at a charity event I had considered skipping. He looked diminished somehow. His custom suits replaced by off-the-rack, his confident swagger now a careful walk. When our eyes met across the room, I nodded politely and continued my conversation without breaking stride. Later, he approached me at the bar. "You look well, Eleanor," he said, his voice subdued. "Thank you," I replied. "How are you, Richard?" "Managing," he said with a tight smile. "The past year has been educational." "It has for many of us," I agreed. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. "For everything. The affairs, the lies, the way I treated you. You deserved better." I studied him, searching for the manipulation behind the apology, but found only resignation and what appeared to be genuine regret. "Yes," I said finally. "I did deserve better. And now I have it." He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "Your company is doing well," he said, referring to my continued role at the tech firm where I was now Chief Innovation Officer. "It is," I confirmed. "And Angela has done amazing things with the agency." He flinched slightly at the reference to his former business. "She always was talented. I should have recognized that." "There were many things you should have recognized, Richard," I said, not unkindly. "I hope you see them more clearly now." As I walked away, I felt no satisfaction in his diminished circumstances, no triumph in having won our divorce. What I felt was something far more valuable: complete indifference. Richard no longer had the power to hurt me, and that was victory enough. 6 months after that chance encounter with Richard, I moved into my new home, a stunning contemporary house overlooking Massachusetts Bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Atlantic Ocean, and a wraparound deck allowed me to watch both sunrise and sunset over the water. It was everything our Beacon Hill brownstone hadn't been: open, light-filled, and entirely mine. As I unpacked the last of my boxes, I found the photo album from our wedding. I sat on my new sofa, watching the waves crash against the shore while I turned pages filled with smiling faces and promises that hadn't survived a decade. The grief hit unexpectedly, not for Richard or even for our marriage, but for the woman I had been. So trusting, so certain that love was enough, so willing to dim my light to make room for someone else's ambition. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you," I whispered to my younger self, smiling up from the photographs. "But I promise, your story doesn't end there." The journey through betrayal and divorce had changed me profoundly. Initially, I threw myself into work, taking on challenging projects that required total focus and left no time for rumination. I traveled extensively, checking off destinations from the bucket list Richard had always been too busy to consider. I dated casually, learning to enjoy male company, without expectations of forever. But something was still missing. The financial security I had built protected me from many of life's hardships, but it couldn't provide meaning or connection. I found myself wondering, what was all this wealth for if not to make a difference? The answer came unexpectedly during a conversation with Samantha's daughter, Lily, who was preparing for college. "I'm thinking about business or finance," she told me over dinner at my new home. "I want to be independent like you, Aunt Ellie. What do you know about managing money?" I asked her. Her response was telling. "Not much. They don't teach it in school, and Mom says she wishes she had learned earlier." That night, I couldn't sleep, thinking about how many young women entered adulthood without the financial education my grandmother had given me. The next morning, I called Marcus with an idea. 3 months later, the Eleanor Rose Foundation for Financial Literacy was born, named for both my grandmother and myself. We developed programs specifically for young women, teaching everything from basic budgeting to investment strategies. I funded scholarships for women pursuing finance and business degrees, with a focus on first-generation college students. The foundation became my passion, giving purpose to the wealth I had accumulated. I assembled a board of accomplished women from diverse backgrounds and industries, each bringing unique perspectives on financial empowerment. We expanded to offer entrepreneurship grants, mentorship programs, and emergency funds for women leaving abusive relationships. As the foundation grew, so did my social circle. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones who shared my values and vision. Among them was Thomas Bennett, an environmental engineer I had known in college before I met Richard. We ran into each other at a climate change fundraiser, and his genuine delight at seeing me was refreshing after so many awkward encounters with former mutual friends. Thomas and I began meeting for coffee, then dinners, then weekend hikes along the coast. He was divorced too, with a teenage daughter he adored. Unlike Richard, he asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. He shared his own passions and challenges without needing to dominate every conversation. Most importantly, he valued me for who I was, not what I could provide or how I made him look. Our relationship developed slowly, built on friendship and mutual respect. When he first kissed me on a snowy evening after a symphony concert, it felt like coming home to a place I hadn't known existed. "I'm not looking to be rescued or to rescue anyone," I told him honestly, as we defined our relationship. "I've learned that lesson." "Good," he replied with a smile. "Because I'm looking for a partner, not a project or a savior." Nearly a year after our divorce was finalized, Richard requested a meeting. After consulting with Victoria, I agreed to see him at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near the financial district. He arrived looking better than he had at the charity event, though still not restored to his former polished self. "Thank you for meeting me," he began after we ordered coffee. "I wanted to apologize properly, not just in passing at an event." "I appreciate that," I said, waiting for him to continue. "I've been doing a lot of work on myself," he explained. "Therapy, mostly. Trying to understand why I sabotaged the best thing in my life." "And what have you discovered?" Asked, genuinely curious. "That I was terrified of not being enough," he admitted. "My father measured a man's worth by his business success and his ability to provide. When you started to outshine me professionally, instead of being proud, I felt threatened. I looked for validation elsewhere. With Jenna, I supplied." He nodded, looking ashamed. "With Jenna and the others before her. They made me feel important, successful, needed in a way I thought you no longer did." "I always believed in you, Richard," I said quietly. "I supported your dreams, even when they meant sacrificing my own." "I know that now," he acknowledged. "The irony is that you never needed me to take care of you. You were building your own security all along." "My grandmother's first lesson," I confirmed. "A woman without her own money is a woman without choices." "Wise woman," Richard said with a rueful smile. I wish I'd paid more attention to her advice. We talked for nearly 2 hours, clearing the air about our marriage and divorce. Richard had secured a position with a smaller marketing firm, starting over at a much lower level than he was accustomed to. His family had adjusted to their reduced circumstances, with varying degrees of grace. Margaret had even taken a part-time job at a friend's boutique, something that would have been unthinkable during our marriage. As we prepared to leave, Richard asked the question I had been expecting. "Is there any chance, Eleanor? For us?" "No, Richard," I said gently but firmly. "That chapter is closed for both of us. But I do wish you well, sincerely." He nodded, accepting my answer without argument. "You've built something remarkable, both with your career and the foundation. I'm sorry I won't be part of it, but I'm glad to see you thriving." We parted with a brief hug that felt like a proper goodbye, something our acrimonious divorce hadn't allowed. In a strange twist of fate, Richard now works for a company that receives significant funding from one of my investment partnerships. When I discovered the connection, I considered divesting but ultimately decided against it. The company does good work, and Richard's professional skills are valuable to their mission. We maintain a cordial distance, connected by financial threads but no longer personally entangled. Margaret eventually reached out to apologize for her behavior during the divorce. "I was protecting my son," she explained during our lunch at a cafe near her new home. "But I was wrong about you, Eleanor. You weren't the problem." "We all protect the people we love," I replied, "even when they don't deserve protection." My foundation's annual gala has become one of Boston's premier charity events. At last year's gathering, I looked around the ballroom filled with young women we had supported, successful businesswomen who mentored them, and men like Thomas who understood that women's financial empowerment strengthens everyone. Samantha nudged me as we watched a recent scholarship recipient speak about starting her financial technology company. "Remember when you thought your life was over because Richard Campbell didn't love you anymore?" I laughed, remembering the devastation I had felt and how incomprehensible my current happiness would have seemed then. The best thing he ever did for me was leave. Thomas joined us, slipping his arm around my waist. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I assured him, just reflecting on unexpected journeys. Later that night, as we walked along the moonlit beach behind my house, our house now, as Thomas and I had decided to move in together, I thought about the woman who had sat frozen in shock after discovering her husband's betrayal. I wished I could tell her that the pain would fade, that she would rebuild, that she would find joy she couldn't imagine in the depths of her grief. But perhaps she had known all along. Perhaps that's why she had quietly built her financial fortress year after year, investment by investment. Perhaps some part of her had been preparing not just for independence, but for a life beyond the limitations she had accepted out of love. The divorce that was meant to break me became the event that truly liberated me, not because of the wealth I had accumulated, but because it forced me to recognize my own value. In losing what I thought was essential, I discovered what was truly important: self-respect, purpose, and the courage to live authentically. I sometimes think about Richard signing those divorce papers, laughing as he believed he was leaving me with nothing. In that moment, he couldn't see that what I possessed couldn't be measured in bank statements or property deeds. The true net worth of a person isn't calculated in dollars, but in integrity, resilience, and the capacity to turn pain into purpose. That's the balance sheet that matters in the end. If my story has resonated with you, I hope you'll take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced that moment when someone who underestimated you realized their mistake? Or perhaps you've had to rebuild after betrayal. Each of our stories is different, but there's strength in sharing them. Please like this video if it spoke to you, and subscribe for more stories about finding your worth after someone else fails to see it. Your support means everything to those of us who share these painful but ultimately empowering journeys. Thank you for listening to mine.